So hello, everyone. I'm just going to start by others already have how much I wish we could all be in the same room right now, in part for all of the good functional and community-oriented reasons, but also selfishly because a significant part of my identity is built around making people both laugh and think, and it's going to be especially hard for me to know whether I've succeeded in either of those things with this format. But as Jessica Salfia's now famous poem goes, in these uncertain times, as we navigate the new normal, are you willing to share your ideas and solutions? As you know, many people are struggling. So I'll do my best to pretend that we're all in the same room, and self-servingly, I will also pretend that you think I'm hilarious. And if you felt, genuinely drawn to letting me know how at least one of my incredibly dumb jokes landed with you, I'd appreciate it. And I was so glad to see your faces in the trivia just a few moments ago. So let's begin. I'm here today to talk to you about why positive relationship building is the critical outcome of your WordPress documentation, user support, and training, and why it's all about feeling good. This is something that I feel very strongly about, and also something that I don't want to downplay the difficulty of. Because it's, it's a thing. So I'm going to start with some introductions. My name, of course, is Kenzie Woodbridge. My pronouns are they and them. I am coming to you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I care an awful lot about documentation and systems and user experience and training, and I enact that care primarily through my work at the British Columbia Institute of Technology in Burnaby, British Columbia. I've been doing this work for a long time. I've been directly supporting our CMS users in using one content management system or another since 2004. I've delivered around 1,000 hours of technical training for our users. I've written a novel's worth of user documentation, and I have developed some strong opinions about the topic of this talk that I'm grateful for an opportunity to expound upon. I'm also a nerd/academic whose primary research interest is the topic of community, especially in online co-creative spaces. For those of you who aren't in the know, BCIT, where I work, is the second largest post-secondary in BC in terms of enrollment. We serve just under 50,000 students at 5 campuses in programs as diverse as welding, nursing, marketing management, nuclear medicine, forestry, aviation, computer science, carpentry, robotics. We run the gamut. We are currently using WordPress for multiple purposes and in multiple departments, but our primary use of it, and the part I'm involved in, is a fairly heavily modded form of WordPress as the CMS for our public website. Our migration into WordPress is ongoing. We started a couple of years ago, and it's taking us a fair bit of time to actually achieve, because it's not just a matter of making something new. We have to move over all of our existing content and our users and our systems and our applications, and of course, do our best to update and improve it along the way. And as we all know, that's a lot more complex than just creating something from scratch, which is to say we're at approximately this point in the process. We're pulled in a million directions, but we're definitely getting there. I'm also going to, before I get too carried away with any of the detail, I'm going to set out for you what my plan is for the talk. I could actually ramble for hours, but I'd like to be a little organized today. So I'm going to try and break it down into 3 basic questions. Firstly, who, or for the pedants among us, including myself, whom, are we actually talking about? Relationships are vessels for people. So who are the people I'm talking about? With whom are they building relationships? These are important points. Secondly, I want to answer the why question from the title of the talk. We're going to answer that to the best of my ability. And then bonus content, I guess. I'm kidding. Is some strategies and tips on how you can do the thing, if I've managed to convince you that it's important. And all the way through, I've got song lyrics from songs about feeling good. Just give me a moment to take a sip of water or what have you. All right, so starting with whom. Who are the groups, the people involved in your website? To be fair, I don't know, actually. I'll start by sketching out what our environment looks like. And I'm guessing that even if the reporting relationships are different, or the skills are combined in different ways, or they're in different groups, most of what I'm going to say here is actually going to look pretty familiar to you. At BCIT, we've been doing our version of distributed web publishing since 2004. That means we have folks in our centralized IT shop who manage the infrastructure, tool development, support, access, all of that. And we also have a much larger group of folks distributed across the organization who are responsible for the content on their own section of the website. We have a cohesive look and feel across the whole website, but they're responsible individually for their content. So all of these people, I'm going to divide them up into 3 broad groups. So in development, we have these folks, right? We have the technical infrastructure people, the people who get up the servers, ensure security, ensure failover, all of that stuff. Very important. We have the back-end developers who, are working on the applications, modifying WordPress, maintaining WordPress, that sort of thing. The front-end developers and designers who make the whole thing look good and, function in the way that it's supposed to, be responsive, have some of those accessibility features built right in, those sorts of things. That's one group. So the second group is content and community support. So that's support for the content and also support for the community that is maintaining the content. And that's these folks. So that includes the people who get the phone call if something goes wrong or someone can't figure out how to use the tool. That includes a trainer and documentarian, that's me. I don't do all of the training, but I do coordinate all of the training. I don't write all the documentation, but I try and coordinate the documentation because we all need to be writing documentation, but that's one role that is in there. Then we've got content strategists, we have writers, UX writers, people who can give really good advice on managing content. And then the last group that I'm going to spend much time on today is our web content community. And that's these folks. These are the people out in our community who are the creators and maintainers of content. That's our marketing strategists scattered across the Institute. That's the content owners, basically, the leadership folks who are responsible for making sure that that we have a vision, that we're, what are we trying to communicate with our website? So those are the groups I'm going to talk about. Now, of course, hey, Kenzie, aren't you forgetting someone, like our actual website users? Have you considered those people or prospective students? And I just want to say, yes, these people are the reason we're doing all of the things, but they're not the people that I'm going to focus on today. So when I'm talking about users for most of the day, I'm actually talking about the users of our content management system and the relationships that we're building as a web content community, distributed publishing community. That's going to be the focus of what I'm talking about. So these people. And then, more specifically than that, where are these opportunities for these relationships to be the critical outcome? It's really us in the content and community support grouping most commonly, and with our web content community. That isn't to say that none of the other possible relationships here matter. They're all important. But this is the focus of what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this. I am going to assert to you that the primary purpose of training, documentation, user support isn't all of the other things that you'd expect. It isn't information transmission. It isn't skill building. It isn't problem solving. So if I'm going to assert that, I better be able to bring the receipts, right? And it's actually a very complex, multifaceted thing. So let's do our best to get into it. So why is it critical? Because a positive relationship, and I'm actually going to start with a because that has nothing to do with our websites, but I'm starting with it because we as workers matter. So it can increase our sense of belonging and well-being. Our experience of our work lives matters. And however hard we try to believe our work selves and our private selves are separate, they're not. So it's important to acknowledge that whatever pragmatic or strategic advantages these positive relationships may offer. They are also important contributors to our overall well-being and our physical and mental health, and those things are important enough in and of themselves. I've added a link here in the slides to Elaine Houston's excellent paper on this topic, and I encourage you to give it a read. But if a thorough lit review isn't your thing, I can also refer you to Mr. Rogers. You know, it matters. The relationships we have with people, they matter a lot. But lest you worry that this is getting too sentimental, let's settle in with some nice calculated pragmatism. Positive relationships are also important because they increase your ability to influence and persuade, right? Positive relationships build trust, and being trusted means that you'll be in a better position to have an impact on the decisions that get made. People are more easily persuaded to change their mind by people they have a good relationship with, and are more likely to resist being persuaded even of very good ideas by people they have come to dislike. So there's a false dichotomy that we sometimes talk about where it's like, well, would you rather be right or liked? I'd rather, you know, I'm not here to make friends, that kind of thing. But it is a false dichotomy because if they don't like you, they don't care that you're right, and they're not going to listen to you be right, and they're not going to, you know, be influenced by you to do the right thing. So this is another reason why positive relationships are very important. And once again, Mr. Rogers also agrees, you'll note, with this statement. So another because is that positive relationships between people and the good feelings they bring are, to a certain extent, transferable. This is, of course, exactly the concept that emotional advertising is based on, right? See this celebrity you like, or this cute animal, or this adorable baby. Please associate them with this thing we're selling so that you feel more positively about it. And here's the thing is, they already, even though I'm talking about positive relationships between human beings, in terms of the people that you're supporting and using technology, they are already a little bit conflating you with the tool that you support. I know this because in addition to the work that I do with our website, I also support our social intranet at our school, and it was not at first popular. And so I have been to many meetings where people would complain bitterly about it and then turn to me and apologize to me as though I were the software that they were insulting, which I am not. So the point I'm trying to make is if they have a positive relationship with you, this is going to actually, to a certain extent, help them to have a more positive relationship with the tool. And that matters because the tool is how they get the work done, and the fewer barriers there can be there, the better, right? Another reason is that positive relationships last longer than technical fixes. They also last longer than technical skills. So if someone calls you up and they have a small problem and you are terse or abrupt, but you fix it, okay. But that fix is going to probably need to happen again, or a different one. So, you know, if you develop over time a positive relationship with people, that's going to last longer than the technical fixes will. And it supports them coming to you when they need a technical fix. Likewise, and this is one of those things that is tricky and counterintuitive, is in particular with training, and I've done a lot of technical training, the primary outcome of training is absolutely relationship building. It is not information transference. It is not skill building. I wish it was. And I honestly, I mean, maybe it's a bit ego-driven here. I honestly believe I'm a pretty good trainer, but I'm also a person with a very good memory, and I've been doing training for 13 years, which means I've seen some of the same people come through training multiple times, and I've given them my finely crafted explanation of why alt text matters many times, and every single time they're like, oh, wow, you really made me think about that. I've never thought about that before. But I know they have thought about that before, because I know that I've told them that same explanation a previous time. People don't remember things to the extent, things that are outside of their regular day-to-day work, to the extent that we remember them. They're important to us, they're central to us, but I promise you, they don't remember those things to the same extent. Positive relationship, though, if they have a positive relationship with you, if they have a positive relationship with your documentation, which you, may I suggest, introduce them to in training, then they're more likely to return to those things. They're more likely to be able to repeatably acquire the technical skill when they need to, than if they don't have that positive relationship. And actually, all of these things are sort of specific, but it also, positive relationships support many other of our desired outcomes. And I'll just, take a little tour through some of the desired outcomes we have as people who are trying to make a website for a purpose. Well, we have some things that we want to happen out of that. For example, we want user satisfaction. We want our website users' needs to be met, right? And there are multiple parts of that. For example, one part of that, one way of meeting their needs is making sure that the content is always correct. That's a desired outcome in our web publishing system. Is the content is correct, it's current, it's accurate, it's up to date. Likewise, it's compliant. It meets all of our standards. It meets all of our accessibility guidelines. It's not broken in any way. It works. So that's another part of that. And also, overall, it's a coherent experience. So what I'm really talking about here is it's desirable for users. It helps to satisfy our users if the information they can find is tied together coherently. They go to a website and they can navigate it in consistent, predictable ways. Those things are important. So that's another important desired outcome to support that satisfied users piece. In addition, another outcome is we would like to have community competence. We would like to, I think for most of us, we want the people who are updating the content to be able to update the content. We don't want them coming to us every single time they want to change a date or fix a small typo or something like that, because there's too much content and there's too few of us generally. So we would need the community to be competent, and our support requests, they need to be manageable. They need to, fit within the capacity that we have. So that's another desired outcome. And those last two actually fit really well into a concept that I think we're all thinking a little bit more about lately, is not just our technical systems resilience, but our people systems resilience. Because, technical resilience is something that I think we've all been thinking a lot about over many years, as we should. If they're doing yet more construction on campus and they dig up yet more power lines suddenly and they take down the whole south side of campus, we want the website to fail over to the appropriate places and all those sorts of things, right? We need technical resilience. But if, for instance, they declare a global pandemic and we all have to suddenly transition to working online and from home, our people systems also need to be resilient. We need to be able to make that shift. We need to have the supports in place. That's a desirable outcome for us, so that we can continue to maintain the website, that we can continue to make it all happen. So yeah, that's that overview of those things. These are desirable outcomes. And good relationships, positive relationships, support all of these outcomes one way or another. User satisfaction, as I say, I'm not talking about relationships with our users, but the relationships that we have with our content community, with the leadership, with all of those things matters. A good example is when I'm talking about a coherent experience, positive relationships will reduce the incidence of, shall we call them, rogue sites, where people are like, oh, I don't like the options available to me. I don't want to have to deal with IT. I don't get the support I need. I'm going to go make my own site, and they fire something up and it's not secure. It doesn't meet privacy regulations and things like that. So positive relationships can contribute to all of these outcomes. All right. And of course, yes. And the last thing I'll say in my list of becauses is that a positive relationship is sometimes the only thing you can actually achieve in the moment. Like, it's the only thing that might be, under your control. Sometimes the servers are down. Sometimes, we're having a global pandemic. Sometimes people don't remember things. There's lots of things that are beyond our control, but the positive relationships that we build with people, sometimes that's the only thing we can do. And that's a good thing to do. Yeah, exactly. All right. Sure. But like, how, right? I briefly considered doing a extremely silly, jokey transition where I pretended that having satisfied the why question, I could just end, and then I would pretend to be surprised, and then I would, act out pulling out a brand new set of slides for this section. But then I realized that, firstly, as a bit, it's really not that funny. And second, it was the kind of thing that might stress out the organizers. And I don't want to do that because they have been great. And you should all show your appreciation to them. And third, there was no guarantee that anyone would actually ask me to keep talking. So I'm going to, transition smoothly into this part like a normal presenter, which I have already ruined. Anyway. But the reason I was having difficulty with it is I think that in many ways, if there is a fundamental shift to be made in your work, and perhaps not, perhaps this is already something that you are prioritizing, but if there is a fundamental shift to be made, it comes from recognizing that relationship building is possible or could be advantageous, and then just deciding to do it. Right? I'm not here to patronize you. You're smart people who have also been in the world for a while. So I'm sure you already know a bunch of ways in which you are working to strengthen or make more positive the relationships you have with your users. I don't want to waste your time with suggestions like, have you considered being friendly? Or, and I have as a life goal, never becoming the dude that tells you should smile more. So rather than get bogged down in relating to your users 101, I'm going to instead offer up a few guiding principles or attitudes that I have found to be helpful to carry into my training and support activities. This means it's necessarily a little more scattered than a 101 would be, so I hope you'll bear with me. I hope it's useful. I should also say that I have been told that being earnest is my superpower, so if any of this just comes across to you in your slightly more jaded circumstances as a bit corny or overly sincere, I apologize. I am legitimately this person. I can't help it. It's just the way I am. But let's do this thing. All right. So the first general principle I want to say is that although I've been a bit mercenary and pragmatic when talking about relationship building, it's important to remember that the relationships you're building are real. They're real and they're purposeful rather than casual. Please understand, I'm not advocating for fake niceness. It's actually hard to sustain over the long term, and it provides none of the benefits for well-being. It's alienating. People can see through it. So the relationship is real, these relationships. And the purpose of the relationships is to work together effectively, to make things better together, to achieve a common goal. Maybe it goes without saying, but I just wanted to make sure that I did note that. And something that I think helps with that is to hold on to the idea that your shared work is important and involving. It matters. This helps. You can rely on the interesting and engaging, important work that you share. It can carry many a good work relationship. Of course, that means you might have to be willing to be a bit of a dork and acknowledge in public that you care. And that can be a bit of a stretch if you're out of the habit. But for example, if you care about accessibility, you need to demonstrate and model that caring to get others on board. I find it really helps to assume that people would be your allies in this if they just knew enough about it, right? And never to assume that they don't care. Assume it's an information problem rather than a values problem, right? So that's that. Next, as a break from my headlong plunge into earnestness, I'm going to make a nitpicky point about word choice, which is I'm going to talk about the dangers of a single word. It is this word, intuitive. You keep using this word I do not think it means what you think it means, because I think you think it means easy to use. Something is intuitive if it is easy to use, it has obvious controls, it just makes sense. But unfortunately, intuitive is a very subjective word. It could mean all of that to you. It could mean all of that to that other user over there. But to the user who has been struggling to accomplish a single task for half the morning before finally calling you for help, intuitive is a word that either means that they are about to be found out and shamed as incompetent, or that you don't know what you're talking about. All that intuitive means is that the way a thing works happens to map perfectly onto your internal expectations of how it should work. It is very, very subjective. That's literally all it means. And intuitive can be a real barrier. I highly recommend you expunge this word from your vocabulary, along with things like, oh, it's so simple, it's so easy. Maybe it isn't, right? Let's not get into it. So that's another principle. Nothing is intuitive or easy or simple or laughably simple, which leads me directly to my next principle, which is going to require a little bit of explanation. Okay, so it's this. Yeah, we're going off in another direction here. Oxytocin and adrenaline are antagonists. This is something that I think about all the time. But what the heck does this mean? Well, the quickest possible endocrinology review, adrenaline is the hormone your brain secretes when you are or believe yourself to be in danger, fight or flight, that kind of thing. There's more complexity to it than that, but it's that one. And oxytocin is the hormone that your brain secretes when you're feeling connected to friends, your partner, your children. It's sometimes called the love hormone, but it's actually more complicated and general than that. We also produce oxytocin when we're digesting a delicious meal or watching a really lovely piece of media or all sorts of things. And it's very important in relationship building. It increases our capacity for empathy in the moment when we're having oxytocin. It increases our ability to learn new information. But oxytocin and adrenaline are antagonists in the body. We can produce one or we can produce the other. We can't produce both at the same time. So why it's important to keep this in mind is if you are trying to train somebody, if you have someone in for training, if you don't set up the learning situation to be safe for them to make mistakes, accepting that mistakes happen, if you set it up in such a way, and I'm not saying you would ever do this on purpose, but if it's accidentally judgmental, if there's negative consequences, if people get called out for making mistakes, you're not setting up a learning environment that is conducive to learning, and you're not setting up a learning environment that is conducive to positive relationship building either. It's really important, more important to set people at their ease, I think, than to proceed rigidly through a training program. You're going to have a lot more success if you make space and time for people to make mistakes. And I always start off all of my training sessions by telling people, I am aiming this directly at your level, the level of I've never done this before, I don't know anything about it, because I want them to know, you're here and I'm drawing you in. So I always think about this, and this is also true about you. You are also not necessarily good at relationship building when you are secreting adrenaline. If you are stressed out, if you are in fear for people in your life, if you are all sorts of things, you may have a hard time connecting with people. And maybe that's a time to not try and do those things, to give yourself a break from that and do something else. This is a principle. I think about it all the time. It's very useful. I highly recommend sort of holding this in your head as you go through your work. All right. The next one is to talk about trust. I talked a little bit about positive relationships help people to trust you, but also I want to say trust requires integrity, and integrity requires honesty. And then I've got here, you are not the tool, you do not need to defend the tool. I've seen a lot of real success with building relationships with people and building up their confidence by being openly critical of when things are just broken in our tool. Don't try and sugarcoat it. Don't try and pretend it's not a problem, because the difference between people who are comfortable with technology and the people who are not comfortable with technology is it's not even a skill difference. It's whether they know enough to know where to place the blame. If people don't know enough to know when it's the fault of the tool, they always blame themselves. And that puts them right down into the adrenaline place, the stress place, the can't get into it place, right? People who know enough to know that, oh man, the tool is just broken. This shouldn't work this way. This is a bad user interface. What is going on? That's a really dumb workflow. Those people are in a place where they can learn. They can go, it's shitty, but I'll figure it out. Oh, I shouldn't swear. I apologize for that. Anyway, so, don't be afraid of calling out the thing if it's a problem. This is one of the ways you can actually build a fair bit of trust with people, is by being unafraid of speaking truth about the thing when it's broken. All right. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to say is that everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn. Be very careful that you don't enter into situations thinking that you are the expert and they are the person who's there to learn from you. You are an expert on the tool, but they are an expert on their content. They are an expert on their students. They are an expert on their programs and their, whole experience of what the thing is and what the student needs are. And, they're the people who are talking to the parents on the phone to help them understand what's going on. So remain open and remain curious, and don't think you're the only one who has something important to add, because we're all experts in the thing we're bringing in there. So that's what I have to say about that. I have one last slide, because I would be uncomfortable if I gave this whole talk and I failed to acknowledge that part of what I am advocating for here is in fact a form of emotional labor. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, emotional labor is the process of managing feelings and emotional expression to fulfill the emotional and intersocial requirements of a job. It's a kind of caretaking. And as with other forms of caretaking, we know that both historically and currently, our expectations of who provides emotional labor tend to be both gendered and racialized. And if we return to the list of roles I displayed earlier, the sharp-eyed among you will likely notice that there are similar divisions in the distribution of these roles in our organizations. Some of the same people that I am suggesting are going to benefit from this positive relationship building may also be gendered and racialized in similar ways. I know that those trends are visible where I work, and I suspect they may be visible to you in your workplaces as well. Now, I sincerely believe that building positive relationships with your colleagues and work communities is a benefit to you, and it's a benefit to you regardless of whether you ever reap any other benefit I've mentioned here. But given that I'm suggesting it is useful and instrumental to our work to build those relationships, it is also therefore part of our workload. It is skilled work, important work. It benefits everyone. So, like everything else in our workload, we need to take care that we are both distributing the work equitably and that we are compensating it appropriately. All right, so that's my talk, and that's what I have for you for today. Thank you.
Kinsey, thank you so much. We've got one question already queued up in the Ask a Question tool. Attendees, if you have questions for Kinsey, please use the Ask a Question, Submit a Question button underneath the chat, or use the Ask a Question tool a little bit further down the page. And we have just under about 8 minutes or so, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. So, Kinsey, the question that I see so far is, How do you keep that cohesive feel of the website while allowing folks to access tools? Do you let them use the block editor or page builders where there can be some user created styles?
So we have a pretty locked down system. They can use. We don't use the built-into WordPress. We're using panels, part of the Square One environment, and the panels that we've built have styles built into them. So there's not as much room for people to go wild with their creativity. And one of my lines from training has always been, "I'm here to crush your creativity." It's a joke, but also is kind of true. Like, as much as possible, we're encouraging them to be within the constraints of the system as we've built it. And yeah. But in order to do that, we have to have the cred of giving them a decent looking website. Otherwise, they would understandably want to do more. Sometimes they're going to want to do it more anyway, because that's, just human nature. People want to make things. They're creative, of course. At this point, we've been doing this for so long, and it's been this way for so long, that we also have those traditions to rely on, which makes it a little easier to enforce than it was, say, 10 years ago. Yeah, I hope that answers that question a bit.
Thank you very much. All right, Kinsey, we have an additional question. That's why I always leave a little bit of room for typing, because I know I have to craft the perfect question when I'm writing one. Okay, the question from the audience member is, can you give an example of how you have made a positive relationship with someone who is reluctant to learn or participate?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why people might be reluctant to learn or participate. So actually, a pretty recent example is we've had to pivot to doing all of our training online. And actually, most of our training was in person before, because I was finding it was very useful to be in the same room with people. And remember when we could share physical space? That was great. But in the pivot to online, that means that now we're, of course, privileging people who are not just, assigned to do the work, but also can navigate Zoom and, do those sorts of things. So there was a department where the person that they wanted to do the thing was really uncomfortable learning online and didn't have things set up. And so I got together with them a couple times before the training session to get them set up. They didn't have 2 monitors, and how are you going to watch the demonstration and also do the thing? So we figured out, they could use their kid's iPad to watch my smiling face. And, also, had they ever connected to the VPN? They'd never connected to the VPN. And so just going through those things, which are not my job, that's not the things I support, but to show that it matters to me that they come in and get the thing, that I know that there's pressure on them to get these skills, but they're really uncomfortable. Well, now they're in there. Now they can make those updates. Now the pressure's off for them. They have the skills that they need as much as possible. They know where to go for help, and they have the access to do the thing. And if not, like if I just said, look, go to the help desk, they'll figure it out, and the help desk would have figured them out, of course. But it wouldn't have been the same getting them into it, getting them comfortable with the tool, getting them ready for the training. I wouldn't have been able to take all the benefit of that push it into now they're in there doing the tool, if that makes any sense. It would have been easy for them to keep pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. So those sorts of things.
So, Kinsey, the last question was about someone who's reluctant to learn. And we have another question that's similar to that. And the question is from one of our attendees. What do you suggest doing if you feel a relationship has gotten off on the wrong foot? Or how can you try to repair a poor relationship? So sometimes you get off on the wrong foot. That happens. It's a good question. And it really depends on the circumstances. In some cases, let's just acknowledge, some relationships aren't necessarily
fully repairable. Maybe this person and you are just going to get up each other's nose every single time. That's just your fate, right? In some cases, it makes sense to refer them to somebody else. Like, you don't have to bend over backwards to fix every single relationship, as long as you're not the only person who can have that relationship. But honestly, it can come back to just, if you have to work with this person, if you have to figure it out, some of those conflict resolution skills are the ones where sometimes you get along with people and it feels like they don't listen to you. Well, that's usually a reflection that they don't feel like you're listening to them either. So if you can do some of that reflective listening kind of thing where you display curiosity, what are their needs? And then you reflect back to them that they have understood it. You demonstrate it to them because, and this is an important point, if understand, we tend to think that's enough. I understand you, and I'm pretty sure that I'm complete with that. But we actually have to demonstrate to people that we understand them. They have to experience our understanding it in order to build that relationship back up. They need to not just have watched you look at them, but also to hear back some of that reflective listening stuff, that you understand their concerns. It needs to be demonstrated. That can be another way of thinking about it, because what you're talking about is actually a kind of a conflict, right? Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the whole question, but.
Kinsey, I've got one more question for you.
Okay.
We had an attendee ask about FAQ pages. So they have a FAQ site before submitting a request to support staff. Often they find that folks jump right to calling or emailing specific support staff without checking the FAQ site and without emailing the general ticket queue. I know we have that problem. It seems like that is a success re-personal relationships, but a failure of our FAQ site. Do you have any insights or thoughts on how we should approach this?
I definitely do. So it is a kind of success as regards the relationship, but it's also this is one where you need solidarity, right? Like, the weakest link is getting all those calls on this. So you all need to toe the line on this and kindly, gently push people to the documentation first. Kindly, firmly, fairly, every single time. If you don't do that, then you don't develop their relationship with the documentation. You don't make that the first place of contact. It's so easy sometimes because you feel like, oh, it's just, I could just solve it for you. But if you've made the documentation, you want them to be able to access it even when you're not available. And that means that you need to be really consistent in pushing them to it. If someone comes to me, I'll say, and they tell me the problem, I'll say, you know what, there's a knowledge base article on that. I'm going to send you a link to that. Can you go through that? And if that answers your questions, then great. And if that doesn't answer your question, then call me back. But I can't be the only one doing that. It has to be everybody else who's doing that too. Otherwise, the person who just helps, people don't want to have to do this thing. And I know it seems counterintuitive. I'm saying, well, don't help them. In fact, push them to documentation. But boundaries are also important in relationships. They're actually really important. So I don't think it's actually inconsistent. Positive relationship building has to be positive for everybody. It can't be a sacrificial relationship. And so part of setting boundaries is pushing them to the documentation. Now, an FAQ page, I'll be honest with you, maybe is not the right resource. I don't know that I want to have to go searching through your FAQ page. Maybe you need to collect that up into smaller chunks that are a little more obvious and concrete rather than have it be a big FAQ page. Maybe that would help. So some improvement to the documentation might help as well, but a consistent approach of pushing them to the documentation first is my main suggestion there.
All right, Kinsey, thank you very much. We are right at time, so I'd like to thank you so much for your informative session. I know I have so much homework to look at for this, so thank you very much.
Thank you.